I have a confession to make that goes out to anybody that has been following this channel for a considerable amount of time. That I, until recently, for whatever reason, never got around to beating the final season of The Walking Dead, which consequently means that I actually had no idea how one of my favorite games by one of my favorite developers concluded and ended. So I decided it was time to remedy this. I said I'm gonna buy myself the definitive edition of this game. I'm gonna sit down. I'm gonna play it front to back, the way that I believe it's meant to be experienced. And I did just that. Eventually, the day came where I ended up having the house to myself with no other responsibilities other than, of course, house sitting and taking care of my pup. So it was actually her and I that ended up playing a lot of Walking Dead to be able to provide you with this video. So let's just get into it. At the bottom of my list, I put Michonne. Not because it's a bad game, not because it's a bad season. I actually like a lot of what they did here. I love the character of Michonne. I think she's a badass. I really like the backstory that they gave her. And I really like kind of the development that they show you, development that they allow her to have by the end of her season. Now, I know that this story is kind of by design meant to be a standalone story off to the side of things, more or less meant to service us fans who are waiting between seasons. But the fundamental issue I have with it is that it doesn't end up connecting to anything. As I played it, I kind of had my fingers crossed in the hopes that somehow, some way, she would pop up again and cross paths with Clementine, maybe even go as far as to make her a playable character again. And of course that doesn't end up happening, which I always thought was kind of a letdown. And I think it is a missed opportunity to kind of open her up as a character again, explore her more, and end up letting her be more involved and more important to the overall story. But because none of that actually happens, that's why it's on the bottom of my list. Above that, we have Season 2, which largely, I think Season 2 is fine. I like that they incorporate the characters from that extra episode from Season 1, 400 Days or whatever it's called. I like how the character of Carver and the villain that he is adds a lot of intense, dramatic moments to this season. The issue that I ended up having with it, for one, is that it really just felt like they were trying to catch lightning in a bottle again. They were trying to recapture a lot of the emotions that the end of the first season did, which doesn't really work. I mean, I like Kenny as a character. I think he's a good dude, and it's definitely sad to see the path that he ends up choosing and going down and making some of those difficult decisions that end up sealing his fate. But it just doesn't feel the same. It doesn't hit as hard. I mean, yes, it did elicit an emotional response. I did end up tearing up and whatever. It sucks, but it just doesn't have the same impact as the ending of the first season does. The other issue, and perhaps the bigger issue that I have with Season 2, was that it was the first instance where I really saw upfront the primary gripe that gamers have against Telltale. Now, in my defense, in experiencing this game as a whole back to back, I saw it very obviously in front of my face, right? But when you're waiting sometimes a couple of years between seasons, a couple months between episodes, you might not remember everything, every little thing about the story season to season. And it might be easy to kind of overlook or forgive a lot of those inconsistencies that, like I said, are very, very obviously there when you play it, back to back to back to back. And this was the first instance where I realized that a lot of the character or the player choices that the player makes, and a lot of those consequences, I think are mostly situational. They're very in the moment, but long term, they don't really matter. They don't really carry the weight that I think that you think they do, or that they're supposed to. And they're very placebo in effect, if you will. That's because I think regardless of those choices, there is a very linear story that the developers are trying to tell. And there is a very linear experience that they want you to have with this game. So at the end of the day, the choices that you make don't really matter, because long term, you're going to end up exactly where they want you to end up. Case in point, got to the end of season 2, I made my choice, and I put Kenny out of his misery and joined up with Jane. Because I like Jane as a character, I felt for Jane, and I was quite curious to see where her and Clementine were going to end up, where that relationship would end up going, how that bond would grow and be tested, and kind of where it would lead long term. Not 2 seconds after I made that decision, do you find out that Jane, to put it delicately for YouTube, takes herself out, right? And there's nothing you can do about it. So you're just stuck with that decision. And like I said, that's where it became very obvious to me of like, irregardless of what I choose and what I want and desire, anything that I choose that might go against that very linear, obvious experience is just going to be undone, right? So in the moment I can make these choices, but if it goes against what Telltale wants me to see or experience, they can just reverse it like that, which is kind of my big complaint about season 2. Holding up the middle of the pack is season 3. Now I know season 3 ended up being very divisive. It ended up dividing a lot of the players, but I for one adored season 3. I got very invested in Javier, the love triangle between his brother and his wife. I felt like, a lot of the things that I did, I felt good about. I liked how everybody got kind of their happy ending. I felt like I was leaving the New Frontier in a good, decent place, and I was quite hopeful that Clementine would end up going to rescue AJ and eventually, maybe someday, bringing him back there so that we could reunite and see these characters again. And this is where Telltale and its inconsistencies just kind of run rampant, because, probably in response to a lot of the backlash that they got, they just up and decided, we're just gonna pretend like season 3 never happened. Essentially, we are just gonna just take the entire thing off the table and just not look back. And really the only reference that it gets after this whole season is Clementine kind of references it and tells you that at some point there was like a civil war or something that happened between the New Frontier and kind of the surrounding settlements. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of bickering between them all, and they were destroyed, and most of, if not everybody, was killed. So even if her and AJ wanted to go back to Javier and his people, there was nothing there to go back to. And I was just like, wow, how disrespectful after all that work and investment I put into that story and those characters. Just because people didn't like it, you're just going to do them dirty and disrespect that season and me as the player. And it really, really sucks. But it is the middle of the pack, I think, for that reason, because much like Michonne, just kind of floating in its own space. Again, a lot of wasted potential because they very obviously chose not to connect it to the larger narrative. There again, made it obvious that, like, anytime that I as the player chose a situation for Clementine to where she's got safety, she's got friends, she's got kind of a family group that she can cling to and essentially be all right with, that immediately gets taken away. That gets destroyed because obviously they want her to develop a certain way. They want her to be this loner, this whatever, where, the outcome is very much controlled. That season 3, that entire thing and kind of the aftermath is yet another instance where I'm not in control of anything, very blatantly. And I'm certainly not in control at that point of my main character. Runner-up is season 4 for a multitude of reasons. First off, they play with your emotions by recreating the ending of season 1 with Clementine and AJ. And right off the bat, I was just like, please don't do this to me again. Don't make me relive this. Don't make me sit here and bawl my eyes out again. Don't break my heart. Luckily, this ends up to be kind of a gotcha moment because, which they got me. I fell for it head over fist, and I was just bracing myself emotionally for that kind of pain and heartbreak. Luckily, this one brought tears to my eyes for another reason. Because, I, like every fan of The Walking Dead, kind of grew up with or alongside Clementine. Through all the ups and downs, through all the heartaches, through all the triumphs, throughout everything, we got to watch her grow up and become the person that she is. and she gets a very fitting ending. She gets a happy ending that I feel for her she deserves, very much so. On the other side of it, though, you know, we all know that this was the last game that Telltale did, and it meant a lot that they were able to finish this, and that this was their send-off, and that the developer and the players were able to come together one last time to say goodbye to Clementine, say goodbye to the characters, say goodbye to the story, say goodbye to the series, close the door on it all collectively, and say goodbye to each other in a very wholesome way. You could tell that it mattered to them. They wanted it to matter to us, and it was the ending, the finale to a beautiful story all the way around, from the story with Clementine to just the developer really caring, and it was just the opportunity for Telltale to say goodbye to us as it was for us to say goodbye to them, and it was just a beautiful moment, I thought, as a fan. But it doesn't beat Season 1. Season 1 is beyond special to me for a few reasons. Obviously, this is the game that this is the season that introduced me to Telltale as a developer. This is the season that introduced me to the Walking Dead series as a whole. I believe this was the first platinum that I got on PS3, and it stands historically as one of the first and only games to make me cry. And I'm not talking little bit of teary-eyed sniffles like at the end of Season 2. I mean a full-on ugly cry, just bawl, like set my controller down and just sit and just vibrate and snot running in the whole ugly picture, right? And I've played through it multiple times now. I think probably 3 or 4 by this point, and it manages to hit the same nerve every single time. Now, I will say, I think I've managed to learn to control it a little bit better, learn to keep myself together so I don't have a complete emotional breakdown every time I play it, but it does get me. It manages to hit me in the exact same spot every time. I get choked up, I get teary-eyed, and I do need to take a second. And like I said, it's one of the only games to date to make me do that. And I think, long after Season 1 came out, long after now that Telltale is no longer in existence, this game has remained super duper special to me, and hopefully will in the future. It's a game that I always think about fondly. I can honestly say I don't think I want to play The Walking Dead for a while after playing all of it back to back to back. It was a lot, but I can still say start to finish, it is a special game. It is an experience. Watching characters grow, forming those attachments, feeling something for them when something good or bad happens to them. I don't think really has to do too much with the story, the choices that you make in the story. Like I said, I think the realization sunk in that none of that matters, but none of it really does matter, because at the end of the day, it's the story, it's the characters, it's the experience that we have going through the seasons that make this game special, and definitely one that will always have a place in my heart. So until next time, guys, we'll see you around.